He wore the uniform of a hero, but that day at the airport, he was treated like an inconvenience. And what happened next? It sparked a national outcry. The terminal buzzed with noise, boarding calls echoing overhead, wheels dragging across the tile, kids chasing each other while exhausted parents struggled to keep up. It was just another day for most, but not for Colonel David Carter. His entrance barely turned heads at first. He walked with purpose, the click of his polished shoes steady and precise. On his chest, rows of ribbons and medals earned over decades of service. But the real weight he carried wasn't pinned to his uniform. It was waiting outside, in a casket, draped in the American flag. Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21 years old, killed in the line of duty. And Colonel Carter had made a promise, one that every soldier knows by heart. No one gets left behind. This wasn't just another flight. This was a sacred responsibility, escorting a fallen brother home. He approached the counter, placed his military ID and travel orders down gently, and offered a quiet, "Good afternoon." The woman behind the desk barely glanced up. Her fingers tapped the keyboard, then slowed, then stopped, her brows furrowed. She looked at the screen again, then up at him. "Sir, can I see those papers again?" Carter handed them over without a word. Years of discipline had taught him to read moments like this. The hesitation in her eyes, the way her posture changed, the sideways glance to a coworker. She leaned over, whispered something. A second agent looked at him, then quickly looked away. The air around the counter shifted. Tension, uncertainty. Something wasn't right. When the woman turned back to him, her voice was polite, too polite. "I'm sorry, sir. There appears to be an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Colonel Carter didn't blink, didn't raise his voice. He simply said, calmly and clearly, "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. My orders are valid. Everything is in order." She didn't look at him. "I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol. We can't override it." Security protocol. A phrase that meant nothing and everything. He had heard it before, in different contexts, different uniforms, different rooms, always vague, always convenient. Usually a mask for something no one wanted to say aloud. Behind him, the line began to slow. People noticed. A decorated army officer in full uniform, being told he couldn't fly. Whispers started. A few cell phones came out. Carter remained still. "I need to understand what's happening. This isn't a personal trip. This is a military assignment. I've done this before, many times. There is no policy preventing me from boarding." The woman hesitated, then looked toward the back of the counter. A supervisor emerged, mid-50s, business casual, tired face. And that tone, the one people use when they want to seem cooperative without actually doing anything. "Sir," he began, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but we have certain protocols in place, and unfortunately, we can't override them at this time." There it was again. That same word, protocol. Carter inhaled slowly through his nose. "I've flown with military escorts before," he said evenly. "I know exactly how this works. I know the paperwork. I know the process. There's no protocol that prevents this." The supervisor shifted, cleared his throat. "It's just an extra security measure. It's nothing personal, sir. Nothing personal." Words that carried the opposite of their meaning. He wasn't just being denied a seat, he was being denied respect. And worse, the mission he was sworn to complete. He could feel the weight of every eye behind him. Travelers were watching now. A few had gone quiet, and still, he didn't raise his voice, didn't let his anger show. Because the moment he did, they'd call security, twist the story, turn him from officer to problem. They were hoping he'd react. They were waiting for it. But he didn't give them that. Because for Colonel David Carter, This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was about Private Reynolds. It was about honor. It was about the silent promise they all make in uniform, to never abandon a fallen soldier, no matter what. And in that airport, surrounded by silence and stares, Carter stood taller. Because if they weren't going to do the right thing, he would make sure the entire country saw what happened when they didn't. She whispered something to her husband. He frowned, glancing at the counter, trying to understand what was happening. Then, from a few steps back in the line, a low, calm voice broke the tension, like glass cracking under pressure. "Excuse me, is there a problem with his military clearance?" Colonel Carter turned his head just slightly. The speaker was older, mid-60s, weathered skin, eyes that had seen war. He wore a Marine Corps cap low over his brow, a veteran, one who recognized what was unfolding far too well. The supervisor hesitated, suddenly unsure. "No, sir, this isn't about clearance. It's just standard protocol." The Marine exhaled sharply, unimpressed. "Yeah? I've been through security more times than I can count, and I've never seen protocol block a soldier from bringing one of our own home. So tell me again, what is this really about?" A murmur ran through the line. People shifted, eyes turned, phones came out. The tension, once invisible, now pulsed through the terminal like static before a storm. The original agent at the desk looked nervous. Her glance at her supervisor was uncertain now, like even she could feel the weight of the room turning. The supervisor ran a hand over his temple and muttered, "Let me check something," before quickly stepping away, avoiding all eye contact. The agent remained, now staring far too intently at her monitor, not typing, not clicking, just trying to disappear. Colonel Carter didn't move. He stood firm, like stone, shoulders back, face forward. He had faced worse than this. But he also knew this wasn't going away. Because now, the crowd wasn't just watching. They were recording. They were thinking. A woman in a denim jacket shook her head slowly and whispered to her husband, "This isn't right. Not for someone in uniform." A young man in a hoodie tapped furiously on his phone, probably live posting the scene in real time. The situation had shifted. The airline didn't just have a delay on their hands. They had a moment, a mistake caught under the national lens. Carter's face showed nothing, but his mind was sharp. Every second, every word, he was cataloging it all. The supervisor was gone longer than necessary. That meant one of two things. He was either scrambling for a new excuse or hoping this would quietly fade. It wouldn't. Then a soft voice spoke beside him. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned slightly. A young woman, no older than 25, stood a few feet away. Phone in hand, eyes nervous, but steady. I don't mean to intrude," she said, "but I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. They're not letting you board?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the way she said it, clear, deliberate, turned heads. People leaned in, listened harder. Carter gave a single nod. "That's correct." She blinked, like she wasn't expecting confirmation. Then, without another word, she held up her phone. "I'm live right now," she said. "People need to see this." And just like that, the floodgates opened. A man nearby raised his phone. "This is wrong," he said, shaking his head. "This man is literally escorting a fallen soldier. What are we even doing here?" Another woman further back raised her voice. "Excuse me? Can someone please explain why he's being denied?" More phones came out. More voices joined in. The room had changed. This was no longer a check-in issue. This was a spotlight. And under that spotlight, the airline staff began to unravel. The original agent's hands hovered over her keyboard, frozen. Her eyes darted between phones and faces and flashing red record lights. Then, the Marine from earlier stepped forward. Enough was enough. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," he said firmly, but I never thought I'd see this. An American soldier, in uniform, turned away while escorting a brother home? His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence in the terminal said everything. Even the overhead announcements seemed to hush. The only sound now was the faint beeping of camera apps, recording, capturing, preserving, truth documented. "This," the Marine said, "is a disgrace." The agent swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled as she finally moved them back to the keyboard. Still, the supervisor hadn't returned, and time was ticking. Passengers whispered. A baby cried in the distance. But even that mother, instead of rocking the stroller, was locked onto her screen, reading about him, reading the story as it unfolded in real time, and somewhere, on a screen across the country, someone had already started typing the headline. She looked down at her phone and shook her head with visible disgust. And then, somewhere in the back of the line, a man's voice cut through the air. "It's already trending." Colonel Carter didn't move. He didn't need to. The crowd had become the witness. The world now was the courtroom. The supervisor had still not returned. The airline employees were locked in silence, not out of protocol, but panic. Phones were up everywhere, live streams were rolling, posts were being written, hashtags formed mid-sentence, and like a match to dry tinder, it caught fire. The young man in the hoodie glanced at his screen and gave a low whistle. Man, this is everywhere now. Carter stayed composed. He knew better than to celebrate prematurely. But he could feel it, and more importantly, so could the airline staff. The woman in the denim jacket gasped, scrolling. "Oh my God," she whispered to her husband. "It's already on Facebook. Look, thousands of shares." The older Marine nodded grimly, pulling out his phone. They have no idea what they just triggered. As if on cue, the airport loudspeaker cracked to life. "Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience." A few groans rose from the crowd, but most people weren't even listening. Their focus had shifted entirely. It wasn't just a delay, it was a story now. One with a clear villain and a man in uniform standing tall at the center of it. Then a young woman by the window held up her phone. "He's on Twitter," she announced. She turned the screen toward the gathering crowd. On it. "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes? Let him fly." Below the post, the numbers were climbing fast. Thousands of likes, comments, and shares. The momentum was unstoppable. Another tweet followed, this one from a national veterans advocacy group. "We are aware of the disgraceful incident happening at airport name. Our soldiers deserve better. Expect action." The tension in the terminal shifted again. The airline had officially lost control of the story. This wasn't just about a delay anymore. It was about dignity, service, and truth. The agent who had first denied Carter's flight now looked completely undone. She quickly stepped away from the counter and disappeared behind a frosted glass door. She wasn't going to find an answer. She was going to find cover. Carter calmly adjusted his hat. He had been in rooms like this before. Not airports, but briefings. Moments when powerful people realized, too late, that they had underestimated the wrong man. But he wasn't smiling, because none of this was about him. It was about Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21 years old, waiting outside, in a flag-draped casket, for his final journey home, and that mission was still incomplete. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were waiting. The entire terminal seemed suspended in that moment. Then, finally, the supervisor returned, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was another man, this one in a sleek navy suit, airline ID clipped to his pocket. His expression was tight, his movements controlled, the kind of demeanor you see from people trained to put out fires, not prevent them. He stopped a few feet short of the counter, surveyed the scene, eyes sweeping over Carter, the Marine, the phones, the crowd. Then he spoke. "Colonel, I want to personally apologize for the miscommunication. There seems to have been an error with our system. We're working to correct it immediately and get you on your flight." Miscommunication. Carter had been in uniform long enough to know what that word really meant. It meant you got caught. It meant fix it, fast, before the damage gets worse. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he let the silence hang, let the weight of it sit squarely on the man's polished shoes. Finally, Carter replied, his tone measured. "I see. You're calling this an error?" "Yes, sir," the man said quickly. "A regrettable mistake. It was never intentional." From the crowd, someone scoffed. The Marine shook his head in disbelief. The suited man adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "We'd like to personally escort you to the gate now, Colonel. First-class accommodations, of course." First class. As if that was the point. Carter looked beyond the man, to the counter, to the spot where the original agent had stood, the one who had smiled without meeting his eyes, the one who had said no before even checking. He took a breath. "I appreciate the urgency," Carter said, "but I need to ask something." The man nodded. "Of course." Carter's voice remained even, low but powerful. "If no one had recorded this, if no one had spoken up, would I still be standing here?" A long beat of silence. The man opened his mouth, but Carter cut him off. "You don't have to answer, because we both already know." The silence was heavier now. Then a voice in the crowd, soft but clear. "He's right." The airline rep straightened, trying again. "Sir, we sincerely apologize," but Carter didn't let him finish. "This isn't about an apology," he said. "It's about accountability." A murmur of agreement moved through the terminal. People weren't just angry anymore, they were disappointed. And the airline? They weren't dealing with a delayed passenger anymore. They were dealing with a nation that had just seen the truth. "Colonel, let us get you on your flight now." But before Carter could respond, another voice broke in. "Sir!" A young man in an airport security uniform stepped forward, holding out a phone. His expression was tight, urgent. "I think you should see this." The airline rep took the phone and scrolled, his face drained of color. The Marine nearby crossed his arms. "What? Something wrong?" The rep didn't answer. He didn't have to. The headline on the screen said it all. U.S. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Airline scrambles as public backlash grows. Below it, a clip from the terminal. This terminal was already playing. It wasn't just a local post anymore. This was national news, and the world was watching. The airline rep handed the phone back and looked at Carter, visibly rattled. We deeply regret this situation. We'd like to issue a public statement clarifying." Carter cut him off. "The public already knows the truth." Silence. The rep swallowed hard. Carter turned to the crowd, to the rows of phones still recording, then back to the rep. "I don't need first class. I don't need special treatment. I need respect. And so does the soldier I'm escorting." A ripple of agreement passed through the terminal. The rep gave a stiff nod. It was all he could do. The Marine grunted softly in approval. Carter adjusted his cap. "Now let me finish this mission." But the airline's troubles were just beginning. They had already lost control. Now they were losing everything else. The terminal didn't feel like a gate anymore. It felt like a press conference. Phones stayed up. Passengers stayed alert. The truth had momentum, and it wasn't stopping. Then something no one expected happened. A man in a dark blue suit stepped into the scene. Not airline staff, not security. You could tell by his walk. You could tell by the quiet way the crowd instinctively made space. Military. His ID badge flashed briefly as he approached. He stepped up to Carter and extended his hand with steady purpose. "Colonel," he said firmly, "I'm Major Thomas Beckett, Department of the Army. We've been made aware of the situation." Carter shook his hand. He didn't ask how Beckett got there so fast. When it comes to their own, the military doesn't delay. Beckett turned toward the airline rep, his voice clipped and formal. "We are handling this now. Colonel Carter and the remains of Private First Class Reynolds will not be flying commercial." The airline rep blinked. "Sir, You were just about to cover your tracks," Beckett said flatly. His tone wasn't angry. It was final. He turned back to Carter. "The Pentagon has arranged for a private military flight. Your transport is waiting." A murmur rippled through the terminal. The United States military had officially stepped in. Carter exhaled, not from relief. He didn't need rescuing. He needed the mission to move forward. He gave a nod. "Understood, Major." Beckett gave the airline rep one final look. "This will be addressed." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Carter turned to the Marine, still watching with quiet satisfaction. "Appreciate you, brother." The Marine tipped his head. "We look out for our own." And with that, Colonel Carter gave the terminal one last look. To the people who had spoken up, to the strangers who had stood beside him, to the crowd who made sure the story didn't get buried. He adjusted his uniform, squared his shoulders, and walked out. Not toward a gate, but toward something bigger. But for the airline, this was far from over. They thought the moment would pass. A carefully worded apology, a generic statement, a quiet reassignment of staff. But this story didn't fade. It caught fire. National news outlets ran the footage on every channel. Veterans organizations issued formal condemnations. Public figures spoke out. Politicians demanded accountability. And then came the financial hit. By the end of the week, the airline's stock had dropped. A boycott hashtag trended for days. Their social media was flooded with demands, anger, and betrayal. Then came the final blow. A coalition of military advocacy groups filed a formal legal complaint, accusing the airline of discrimination and violation of service member protections. Under pressure, the airline's CEO made a public statement. He called it a regrettable misunderstanding. He confirmed that the employees involved had been placed on leave. Too little, too late. Meanwhile, Colonel Carter completed his mission. He flew not as a passenger, but as a guardian. He stood by as Private First Class Jason Reynolds was returned home, his family waiting with folded flags and silent heartbreak. Carter didn't need a headline. He didn't need a press release. He needed respect. Because that's the fight that never ends. The one for basic dignity. The one that shouldn't require cameras or hashtags to exist. The people at that terminal, the Marine, the woman in the denim jacket, the girl who hit "Go Live" instead of looking away, they proved something. When people stand together, injustice has nowhere to hide. If you believe in respect, if you believe in accountability, if you believe that those who serve deserve better, let your voice be heard, because silence is how this happens again. And next time, it might not go viral.